So what you're saying is it's working.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial video.
The fuck is happening, bro? Brave should not be open. Period. What just happened? There's nothing.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial video. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to live stream on YouTube from start to finish. So if you're looking for...
God, so annoying. Can you hear me? Okay. So it looks like we're just waiting. I sent the email to Jimbob. We're just waiting on him to join the Zoom chat, and then we should be good to go. Gosh, this has been taking me hours to try to figure out how to live stream on here and download OBS and all this stuff. Just incredible. Okay. Mr. Jimbob. Sent it. Okay. Let's see here. Are you guys hearing me through the microphone? Microphone testing, 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 testing. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, so we just need Jimbob to join and we are good to go. Okay, not through the mic. Gotcha. Alright, how do I get this? Alright. Okay, what about now? Testing, 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 testing. Yes, my lab. Yes, you are hearing the white noise from my laptop. Did it change at all? Okay, awesome. Sorry, guys. Thanks for bearing with me. This is the first time it's taken forever to try to figure this out. Okay. Is the Enochian devil. um. Oh man, how you guys doing today? I'm following you guys in the chat. Jeez. Again, I apologize for how unsmooth this is going to be. I am trying to do all this for the first time. Okay. Let me message Jimbob, let him know that we're ready. Valis, isn't that the title of a Philip K. Dick book? Or am I misremembering that? Who's Jimbob? Jimbob is a gentleman. He's a cartoonist. You should check his stuff out. If you go to Instagram and just put in "made by Jimbob," you'll find his profile. It's got like 40-some thousand followers. Okay. The devil uses you. Oh. Okay. Um. Jimbob. Okay. How do I hide the Zoom ID? Guys, I'm totally new to the live stream game, so you're going to have to help me out. How do I... What the hell? Oh, jeez. How the heck do we get this thing? Crops. Okay, crops OBS filter. God. So... How do I get rid of that? Oh my god. How the hell do you do all this shit? Okay, there's that. What the heck? Invite? Oh my god. Okay. Okay. I just sent... So it sounds like Jimbob is not able to join the convo or the meeting for some reason. And... Oh, Jimbob. You here, brother? Hello? Check, check, check. I don't hear you. There we go. Heck yes. Can you hear me? I think you might be muted. I see you now. I see you, but I don't hear you. On the bottom left where the microphone is. Okay. Still here, brother? Looks like your screen is frozen. Oh boy. Okay, so Jimbob told me he needs to download the updated version of Zoom. For some reason, his audio wasn't working, and so he is doing that. Again, I appreciate you guys bearing with us here. Jay needs to do a tutorial class on how to use OBS. This thing is a nightmare. Okay. Stuff is a nightmare. All right. Of course. Oh, hey, brother. Can you can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think we just need Jimbob to connect his audio somehow. I'm not sure. Hello? Hello? Jimbob, you here? Hello? 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 Looks like you've entered twice. Hello? Oh, I hear you.
Oh, good. All right. Yeah, I had to download the Chrome.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Hey,
How's it
you
going, man?
doing great, brother. Hey, do you know you're in here at twice? I don't know how.
Yeah. Let me see.
Hold on. I think I can remove it. I think you're good.
Because I'm trying to leave the meeting on the other one and it's frozen.
Ah. Yep, we're good now.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right. Woo. Dude, this OBS is a nightmare trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's kind of what's stopping me from doing what you guys are doing as well. Just like technically, I'm like, what?
Oh
What
my
are all
god.
these little things? Like, there's always a step. There's like an encoder. There's a. I can't figure it out. I need my computer.
Um so let me check with the chat. How's the audio? Yeah, Jay just said OBS and Zoom are a nightmare. No joke. God, it's been so frustrating trying to figure out how to do this today.
Yeah, every time I watch the beginning of Jay's streams or around my guest, I could always just barely sense his recent fluster on his face.
Yeah, no joke. Oh my gosh. This I've been watching tutorial videos on just how to do Skype and the OBS, and then you had the NDI thing, and then I couldn't get it downloaded, and then but Jay said he doesn't use Zoom anymore, and shoot, I didn't. It was the last option I had to try to get video into OBS and then OBS over to YouTube Livestream.
Mm.
Anyways, glad you're here, brother. How's your day going?
Yeah, thank you. It's going good. This is my day off from my day job, so it's cool to just hang out at home and hang with the family, and I'm able to do things like this.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, so glad that we could set this up and have a conversation. I've been a big fan of your work back when, right before you did a discussion with Owen Benjamin.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, that was kind of in the beginning. That's when I was starting to get like banned a little bit here and there, and
Yes.
yeah, I've had that's a great reference point because my entire worldview has changed so dramatically since that first time I went on to Owen, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was like kind of like the crux for me for a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about is get more kind of the background information in regards to your story. So if you don't mind,
Sure.
I'd be fascinated of kind of where does your journey begin? Again, using sort of Owen Benjamin as a reference point in terms of before the kind of movement, changing politics, changing
Yeah.
worldviews, changing understandings of spirituality, and then
Yeah.
where you're at now. So if you could just kind of go into your journey, that'd be fascinating.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Hunter Mountain. It's about an hour below Albany, New York. Tiny town of 2,000 people, one red light kind of thing.
Oh, hold on,
Graduating
bro.
class of.
Hold on, brother. They're saying that your volume is low.
Okay. Here, wait. I can get my mic closer too. Let me
Ah,
see.
see if that's it.
How's that? Let me. How's that?
Let's see.
Is
Chat,
that
chat.
better?
I bet.
Let's see if I can do this without making a lot of rattling.
I,
Turn up the gain. Is that?
you were sounded loud and clear to me. Gosh, I don't even want to mess with the
That's
OBS
probably
settings.
This is probably better because it was on the table next to me over to the right. So ask the chat if this is better. Check.
Check.
Is that better?
Okay, they're saying I need to boost it in the OBS. Oh, good lord.
Oh, on your side.
Let me do what I can here. Advanced audio. Settings. Audio. I am not sure even what to do. Jay, do you have some recommendations here? How do you turn up somebody else's volume? Jay, I think he may have dipped out here while we were trying to figure out all this stuff. Because I can hear you perfectly. That's what's.
Yeah, it's like your output. It's because you're like the master track person, like a DJ. So
Right.
Yeah, there's probably a way because when you're the mediator, you can turn people down, your volume down. But I'm not sure. No.
Dang it. What if I go here? Sorry about the hassle here, brother. Just trying to.
It's not a problem for me.
But audio mixer. Hello. Does this change anything?
Check. Hello. Can you guys hear me better now?
Check. There's a delay on the chat, so it takes a minute. Oh, it's all quiet now. Great.
They're like, I'm not doing this.
Check. Does this sound better?
Hello.
Oh, I think we just got somebody said that's good.
It's good? Better? Good now?
Now,
Thumbs up?
now it says we're near silent, but I just turned it all up, so I'm a little confused. Gosh dang it. Come on, guys. So...
Sure they're not atheists?
he's still quiet. Okay, so you're...
I'm still quiet?
How does anybody know how to use OBS? Tell me how to turn his volume up. I just don't know how to use this dang thing.
What's weird is that you can hear me well, so if you can hear me clear. Let me, I'm going to look it up for you too.
I appreciate that. Try turning up the gain on Jimbob's mic. See if that helps. Well, where do I turn up his mic?
Here's the gain on my mic. I don't know if that helps on your side. Hello?
Right.
Hello? It says open your Zoom app, click on settings.
Okay.
On the audio tab. Okay, wait, that's more.
Audio settings.
Wait. Oh, attendee controls, okay. You're considered an attendee. You have host controls.
Okay. So
the attendee controls appear at the bottom of your screen if you're currently screen sharing. So audio controls, click the arrow next to the mute button.
Yep, did that.
So that's for
select,
you, right?
Select the
I
speaker.
have to do it. There we go. Okay, this should be better.
There we
I
go.
went to mine and clicked.
How's this sound now, guys?
My Yeti, selected my Yeti instead of the same system.
Ah.
So, I mean, that should do something.
Yes, I bet that's it.
Is that better? Anybody?
It says that didn't guess still low, but better than before.
That's low. Okay.
Let
me see.
5% better is what we got.
How about now? Is this better, you guys?
Yeah, how's that sound?
Better. This should be considerably better.
Yeah, that sounds crystal clear to me. How's that sound to you guys?
You guys hear me?
They say it's better.
Okay. Well, I'll just try to talk louder.
All right. We got it's better, it'll do, it's fine. This stream is about to go Sonic Boomer level.
Exactly.
Is it? And then somebody says it's not good enough to do a stream on. Okay.
Really?
I don't know what they're talking.
How can that be okay for some people but not some others? I don't.
Like some guy said, he won't be able to follow. I don't know. It sounds great to me.
Let me change it to MacBook Pro and see if my computer picks it up.
Okay.
How about that? Let me see. I'm gonna just unplug my mic.
There should be a mixer in OBS where you can just adjust gain your inputs. Okay, where in OBS?
Is that better?
Is it better, guys? Check.
Is that better? I can't hear me now. No.
They keep telling me to change the gain in OBS. I don't know where that is. I'm literally in settings, in audio.
Let me see.
Same, no. No, it isn't. No difference. Nope. Okay, so if you changing your source isn't changing it.
Hello. Yeah, it's weird. I could hear myself like really clearly.
Uh-huh.
Gains up really high.
Okay, how to adjust gain in OBS. Okay, so I think if I go here, so feedback from the chat. What about now?
Hello, check. Hello. Are you hearing me?
Oh my god. No change. So Jay's here. He said Jimbob is low. Jay, how do you change the gain in OBS?
Are you seeing this?
Click on that. And guys, here you can see we have this mic, the volume percentage. You can see currently we have this 100. Okay. So in order to increase that, so just write 100. You can see it's now increased. And if I want to increase more,
did you see that?
Okay. All right. Well, I know where that screen's at. Okay. So
subscribe to Whisper channel and press the bell icon and never miss.
Okay. Check. Is this
Hello.
Is this better?
Increase microphone volume on OBS Studio. Okay. So you can see, guys, my microphone volume is very low, and I'm recording with OBS Studio.
Whatever your audio
so
input is.
You need to open your OBS Studio. So I'm opening mine. Okay. You can see OBS Studio is now opened. Okay. And after that, you need to select your scene, and after that, just select what kind of recording you use. Okay. And you will see the audio settings. Okay. So here we have the desktop audio. You need not to touch this. And here we have the mic. Okay. So, and here we have the gear icon. So you need to click on this gear icon, under this mic. And here we have the advanced audio properties. Click on that. And guys, here you can see we have this mic, the volume percentage.
Yeah.
You can see currently we have this 100. Okay. So in order to increase that, so just write 100. You can see it's now increased. And if I want to increase more, 100, and you can see it's increased. And if I want to increase more, I need 100. Let's see. You can see it's now increased. Okay. So just write the percentage that you like. Okay. And after that, click on this close button. Okay, guys. So it's now done. It's in this way you can.
So on that little screen, is there one of your mics and one of mine?
Well, I just changed it to desktop. So I had it on my personal microphone. I wonder if that had anything to do with it. So maybe me changing it to this.
It was recording my voice through your microphone, right?
Potentially.
I think
How-
that's what was happening.
How does it sound? How's it sound now, guys, gentlemen?
Hello, hello, hello. Yeah, that would make sense if it was.
Jay just said persevere, bigot. Thank you for that wonderful super chat, Jay. Oh shit. Okay.
There's something on your side that's just taking all the audio and putting it into your microphone.
Okay.
Because you don't use headphones, so it's not basically like all of the audio is going into your mic.
So if I change it to my internal microphone on my computer, does that work for everybody?
That changed something.
Does that sound better? So in OBS, you need an audio input.
Does that? Am I clearer to the chat?
Yeah. Something
changed.
How does this sound?
Check. 1, 2, 3. This is my voice. Laurel.
Got another super chat. It said this stream is OBS, Ortho Boomer Stream.
Yeah.
But seriously, does that sound any better if we just use if I use the internal microphone? Try plus in OBS.
The thing is, my voice is still coming out of your just computer.
Right.
Maybe. Have you had guests before or not?
No, never a live stream. I normally just record the audios through Zoom or through.
Oh, got you.
But never on a live stream like this.
Right. Well, it's got to be possible because Jay doesn't use these dumb headphones that I'm wearing.
Mic/auxiliary 1, mic/auxiliary 2, default. Wonder if that helped. Then choose do plus, then audio input, then choose okay. God dang it.
It's all a matter of learning this, though.
I know.
I'm happy to be the first.
Yeah, I'm glad you had the patience to bear with me here. Okay, so it looks like we got two audios now. There we go. Does this sound better, guys?
Hello, 2 audios. Is that good?
Do you see
Sound
plus in OBS? Yes, plus audio input. Yes, I see the plus, Jay.
Got 2 inputs now.
Okay, hold on. He said plus. A little better, but still not great. Is there a drop down of audio inputs? Sounds better. Just turn the new input up. Okay.
It's like your OBS is just a pile of snakes in your office. You're just torn with the chaos of it all.
Okay, let me see here. I think that we may have figured it out.
Check, 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 check.
Okay, I think that should... How's that sound now, guys?
Check, check, check. I'm hearing me clearly.
Let's have him turn his...
Game up.
Oh, it's a little bit better. No, somebody said much better. We got two much betters.
Much better?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Both are loud now.
Yay.
Okay, all right. I think we are good to go. Wow. Okay, so lesson to self, you have to add the audio input into OBS. You can't just use Zoom. Thank you for that heads up, Jay. All right. So back to where we were before that little 30-minute adventure. So we were getting ready to go into kind of your own journey. We were talking about the reference point where I came across of you was right before you went on Owen Benjamin's stream. This is probably, what, a year and a half ago now?
Yeah.
And then you're getting ready to kind of talk about your journey from where you were in regards to kind of spiritual, political ideals, movement into that time period about a year and a half ago, and then to where you are now.
Right. Well, I was born into a religious family. We were born-again Christian. You know, there I am as a 5-year-old at the foot of my mom's bed with my 3 older brothers to the left of me. There's a community of people holding hands, speaking in tongues while my mom gives birth to my sister. That was my earliest memory religiously. So I didn't equate it with religion then. Like, I didn't even know. I thought maybe I was an Arab or something. I didn't understand speaking in tongues or anything like that. So yeah, we grew up religious, and but it was all just straight church. It was right to the Bible, right to church, and as I grew older, I started rejecting it and rebelling, and then I moved to LA, and I was an atheist and a nihilist, relativist, socialist, all of the things you do when you go to LA and reject your traditions and your roots. And it wasn't until, getting into cartooning and, looking at the truth of the matter. And then eventually I went on to Owen Benjamin, and he mentioned the word logos, and I've never heard that term ever. And I saw the connection between logic itself, the words, language, the Bible. And that was my first, legitimate, sincere interest in theology, just as a whole. And so, because my work, cartooning, relies on pinpointing fallacies or absurdities, contradictions, philosophy, all of these things, it's natural. It was a natural progression for me to keep digging in and exploring. And so, that word then led me to another podcast, which Jay Dyer does himself, in addition to his own podcast, is The Boiler Room. Mm-hmm. They suggested when I first went on there to check out Jay, and then I bothered Jay, invited myself on his stream, and then from there it's just been exploring logic itself, how all logic points to metaphysical, and how all knowledge relies on metaphysical, and I've since found the transcendental argument, which up to this point it's very difficult to refute it. I haven't heard it's not even just refute it. I haven't even heard a single decent response that that doesn't just resort back to empiricism or what you guys call the classical foundational model. And the stuff is so powerful because I'm not in the place even yet of really digging into the Bible itself, even though I love it and I read it and I find messages and things that are just true timelessly. But this other approach of philosophy and logic, to me, seems like the hidden door, that's been somewhat removed over the last however many centuries. And it makes total sense. Like, if you don't have the introduction to logic and some philosophy and understanding that first argument, the tag argument, you're always going to go into religion or God, investigating these things from the classical foundational model, which will eventually limit itself. So if there's a big open door to God, theology just as a whole, not even the particulars of beliefs, but just as a whole, I feel like that door is the transcendental argument. And so that's where I am now. I love it. Mm-hmm. I love debating people about it. I love learning from people like you and Jay and watching the debates between people who argue from that perspective versus from the classical model, like William Lane Craig. And I see now what the critiques are of all of those that you've done and Jay's been doing for years.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's cool because, what's cool about it is that for a belief, for faith, you want to be able to defend it logically. Mm-hmm. That's what everyone wants. And I feel like because theism and religion in general is pushed from the classical foundational model, it's very difficult for people to get on board because they're already reduced to material. They're already arguing from history. They're arguing from facts. And they're not, all of that stuff is already at a starting point that just assumes all of the preconditions underneath it. And for me, I always thought, well, what we have is material, and eventually we're going to learn more, and then eventually we'll be so smart we'll understand the metaphysical. And not until now I see that the metaphysical is underneath. It's actually the foundation upon which those methods are built, not the other way around. We don't build material methods to find out what the metaphysical is. To me, it's on a picture. It's
right.
There's a house. The house is classical foundationalism, mm-hmm. or materialism, or whatever you want, however you want to operate. Underneath it, you're already standing on metaphysical assumptions. So it makes logical sense to me.
Absolutely, and I think with what you're saying in regards to sort of beginning with the metaphysical, I think that is sort of a you move into that space by realizing the priority of all these categories, and that you can't begin with induction, you can't begin with the classical foundationalist model, because we're assuming all these things, and that's why the tag argument, I think, is so powerful. Jay's apologetical method, I mean, it's not Jay's, of course, but the way that he was kind of the first person I saw really using it out in the field, if you will. And I think it's so powerful because that is the realization, is that you have to begin with the non-physical, which then leads to the assumption you have to begin with the assumption of God, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and even if you try to argue around God, because it's just knowledge itself, like this idea, we can almost all of us can agree, unless you're an absurdist, like that we're discovering knowledge, some form of wisdom, something that pre-exists our ability to discern it to begin with. And if that's the case, knowledge, information, pragmatic information, morality, these immaterial things we just accept exist. It's logical to just say, well, no, they're associated with a mind. At least get to a mind. Right. For those of you who are just don't want to skip to God. But eventually, if you were to describe the mind, they couldn't be material they would have to be spaceless and timeless, and that would be then getting into that other argument. But yeah, I've looked at it from all angles, and as a skeptic, not even less than 2 years ago, so I hit it with everything I could, and I'm like, any alternative is, and Jay's seen this with his own debates, is that the alternative is just epistemic nihilism and just questioning logic itself, which then, what are you questioning it with, and so forth. and then people they get so mad about this stuff, and then what they end up doing is just going like, well, whatever, you're just saying like a dude, like some guy in the sky did it, and it's like, or the spaghetti monster, and it's really an indication of what someone actually going face to face with the consequences of the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And can you live coherently? Can you live a consistent life with really believing that everything is just material? Like I had a debate, just a thumb debate, I call them, on my Instagram account about love. One person is, saying you were made in love, you were created in love, and the others, I forgot what she's saying. Sorry. But anyway, the whole idea was about love, and someone was like, love is just a chemical, and then we're back into this classical foundational model of determine. Then I'm like, you could put love in the same immaterial category as knowledge, truth, logic, math, and all these other concepts that we can transplant onto reality as we experience it. And based on that assumption, knowledge itself would just be a chemical, and we couldn't distinguish. From my view, it's like, once you go to everything is just chemical, there's no point in even making the distinction of love or knowledge or pain, or it's all just, you're just using words that are already meaningless because it's all just chemical, and you're just trying to divide them up. Like, there would be no distinction between any of these things if it was all just chemical. What would be the point? So these are really funny arguments, because people end up inevitably using rigor or using some sort of rigorous position for one immaterial category, but then like almost like devaluing one immaterial in the category but accepting the other. Like they'll accept knowledge as a thing. Right. No, knowledge is different than love. Love you can like see in the brain, like you can see the chemical. I'm like, if it's just an input, so knowledge would be also just an input into the brain that you're just like looking at. Oh, you just got knowledge, and so it's just fun at this point. I used to get a little flustered and mad and call people names even, but now it's like it's just fun to explore, and those who are willing to confront the absurdity, they're at least one step closer to accepting the transcendental argument itself, and then that's the doorway. I know now that it's a process. You can't just hit people with the God stick. Right. Like, didn't work on me, but that's what excites me about this, is like I could actually defend my beliefs.
Right.
And it's fun.
In that coherency that you're talking about, I think because people actually do have a fundamental presupposition of relativism, whether they're conscious of it or not, the emphasis on coherency isn't a big deal. For example, when I came back, I moved back from Berkeley to Indiana to work on my doctorate here, and I went and visited my undergraduate advisor. He is a big, a good, prominent scholar within ethics. And he is a pragmatist, and he is in the school of John Dewey. And when I talked to him, because he is aware of my journey and my undergraduate degree, I was interested in East Asian stuff, studying magic. Then he was aware of my master's and kind of my whole experience with psychedelics and my YouTube channel and all this stuff. And then now I come back and I tell him, you know what, I'm actually really, really interested in orthodoxy. This was back in September of 19. And told him that I've been going to church, and that the coherency of the worldview has been really powerful for me, because it can account for all these things. And then he kind of looked at me, he's like, well, why are you privileging coherency? What's the big deal about having a coherent worldview? And this is a very prominent scholar, and it's like, well, it has to do with that, then living out the things that you say. That's a sort of another form of coherency. I mean, coherency is a big deal, really. And then when you start analyzing worldviews, the theory of truth can only come from a coherency model. That's the only way you can judge something to be true, which is going to have to do with like logical follow. So really, you're just in the realm of logic. And I think a lot of people just don't care to have a coherent worldview. It just doesn't interest them. They don't care.
Yeah, the consequences are still there, though.
Yes.
They will be hit with the consequences, whether they know it or not. Just the humiliation of arguing something about that you care about. If you don't care about coherency, then you can't really even say who cares about coherency, because then you're starting a logical argument about the invalidity or, like the veracity of logic itself. So, yeah, it's like, it's just like when I watched the debate with Jay and Matt. Like, again, as I said before, they eventually you're left to just questioning whether logic is useful or not. Like, who cares, basically. But if you're a pragmatist, you depend on logic and coherency, because you have to be able to use persuasion to say, well, first of all, is this pragmatic? Then you're going to have to answer according to what goal. And then you have to convince people that the goal is good. And then you have to use logic and coherency to convince people that that's a logical step to say this is good. Right. And why. And then you can't be a pragmatist and reject logic, but you also can't be a pragmatist and
account for logic.
And account for or try to base ethics and morality on it either. If you because you can't exactly if you're going to be a pragmatist, you need logic. Right. But if you're going to assert ethics and morality, you can't just abandon logic. Like you can't have both sides. You have to ridicule your claims with the same tool that you've created the claim with. So, yeah, all that stuff is really interesting to me. That's all lost on very smart people. It's lost on very influential people. And you just see the trend of the Jordan Petersons and now the Russell Brand is like a full-on utilitarianist.
Right.
Basically like a cult leader in a movement. Like he's just like, everything can work for everybody. It's just idealism that's based in the material, and it's such a trap. And I loved your last video. I actually shared a stream about distinguishing why love and all of these other material virtues have to be experienced through the personhood and transmitted one-to-one. Right. And once they get relocated in the abstract many faceless beings, that's utilitarianism. But in like this sort of like in a Russell Brand attempt, it's like this spiritual pragmatism. Like you're using spirituality to then try to shove it into this box called pragmatism or utility or whatever, and it just falls apart because what you said. It falls apart because you're assuming that this mass of faceless beings that you can think in your head, love. I thought love out there, so it's going to go out there, and that's good. It's all energy, man. And it's like, no, it's a one-to-one expression. It's eye contact. It's touch. Right. It's all of the things that we express the acknowledgement of dignity of other humans. These are all, you could reduce the touch to the chemical. Like you can reduce that's what is, not why, Mm-hmm. And so, it's bizarre to me, but it also makes total sense because the last, 100 years has been about, undercutting logic and philosophy. There's a reason that logos got attached to God. There's a reason back then. Like it's because of the cohesive argument. It's not, and we've abandoned that. And like Jay was telling me, like during the Enlightenment, the whole transition between God giving us our dignity and our life and all of the things we have, our pursuits, to natural law. You know, this idea, like you can clearly see the subversion and the inversion, using language to then take it out of the theological approach to putting it into the government approach, which is the man's approach. Government and God. It's like man, God. So that's all very clear to me. Even the word rights. Like, I even, someone argues that without God, I'll just go full nihilism on them. And like, why are you being a nihilist?
Exactly.
It's like, no, you use nihilism to give them the mirror, and then they have to confront the mirror of nihilism, what that actually means, and then they start having to argue and find a way to base dignity. You have to find a way to, how do I ground dignity? No.
Right.
And then they go into tautologies, and it gets really funny.
Right.
Why is murder wrong? Because it's bloody. Why is bloody wrong? Because it hurts. Like, see how many redescriptions or whatever you can put on a thing, arguing against something by redefining it a bunch of times is really something that it's like I have compassion because I was that person,
Right.
I was making the same argument. I was doing the same thing.
I was too, and that's kind of part of what we were talking about wanting to explore in this video, is the comfortable nature of kind of existing in the spiritual but not religious, the New Age worldview, because it allows you to express like love, like consciousness, like all these things are just these abstract ideals that by definition are one-to-one and personal in nature. And so could you speak about your sort of journey through the New Age, through the spiritual but not religious phase, and kind of what were you enamored with and your journey out of Christianity or whatever you know?
Okay, yeah. Well, I moved to LA with a friend, and he was deep into technology. So I clearly replaced God with futurism right away. I just grabbed the community of futurism. I helped produce futurist events about accelerating change in technology. I became, enamored by transhumanism, the future. This is the future. God is dead, etc. And so that left me. What's funny is that I couldn't do anything about it. It was all imagining futures. Like, what are these futures that I can imagine through technology? And then once I realized through close friends and people that showed me that I'm not doing anything. I can't practice these ideas of the future. I can only imagine scenarios of the future that are given by new tech and stuff. I can't do anything today. I can't, my life and value can't come from the future. So I kind of went away from that, and then I got into intense self-help. I got into a company called Landmark Education that, like Peterson, got me out of nihilism, but it also pushes a circular nihilism itself, a narcissism, if you will. But you get the experience that your life's getting better. And
what year was this?
What's that?
What year? Just curious the time frame.
2006 or so.
Okay.
And I did really intense program. I mean, that program came out of the early 60s, 70s, the EST program, where they were really pushing the boundary of human experience and humiliation and how little you are and nothing really matters. Their mantra is kind of life is empty and meaningless, and it's meaningless because it's empty and meaningless, that kind of mantras. But they borrow from Buddhism, they borrow from Christianity, they just put it in a Vitamix, and then they give you a big milkshake of it, and then you're surrounded by people who are maybe not living it out in their life, but you're in a center area that you volunteer in, so you're constantly finding confirmation bias that it's the program that's giving you your life, and vice versa, like a circularity. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
All like you said, I'm so enamored by that, and I fully don't understand it yet. But there's something circular about all of those programs where you empower the thing that you think you're getting the thing from, and the same concept does exist in theology, but it's just different standards and different ways you're going to, try to measure it, I guess. But so yeah, I was into self-help stuff, and then I rejected that eventually, or just got bored of it, and then I did Vipassana, which is a 10-day silent meditation retreat. Silent, no movement, no talking, no phones, eating 3 times a day, meditating from 4 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. all day.
Was Jack
All
Dorsey
day.
there?
Probably. There's probably a bunch of people. This is up in North Fork, California.
Wow.
So yeah, there was something that I got from that as far as like, that was my Sam Harris journey. Like that's when I was like, wow, everything's about well-being and just observing it, man. Like you just observe everything and it becomes nothing. You just shed it away. And again, you can't really live that way. So I rejected that, and then I had a kid. I had a whole other failed life. I had a failed previous marriage. It was all based on vanity. It was all based on materialism, atheism. Like measuring what I can do myself, accomplishment, all narcissism. And then I had a child. And that kind of like hit me on the head as far as like one thing about having a child, and it's just I don't know if it's for everyone, but I started to question like what I believe based on what I'd be willing to teach my kid. I think that's the real like arbiter for me. It was like I'll know if I believe something if I can and I'm willing to teach it. And right when I had that realization, it was scary but relieving. It was scary because I realized I had nothing to teach. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Because everything that mattered is immaterial. Everything that mattered must come from transcendent source. It cannot be based on man. I can't teach gratitude. You can't just be grateful to material. That makes no sense. Like you can't be grateful to a universe that's not conscious, that doesn't care about you, some abstract thing out there. Then you can't, like prayer before meals. Who are you thanking? Are you who are you praying to? Are you praying to a man who grew the food? That's just weird. You just thank him. So that's embedded in us. Like, and we know this because people who do reject a religion, theology as a whole, they end up replacing it with something. They cannot help it. Like Jay says, people are fundamentally religious, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong if the word religion isn't used, but I get you get the point. It's like we search for the transcendental. The whole show, like that ridiculous show that I thought was a spoof of Portlandia with Gwyneth Paltrow called Goop. It's always these hippy dippy people trying to find God through all of these funny things. It's like they're doing mushrooms, they're having orgasms, it's like it's so clear once you go, oh, everyone's after the same thing. Like they're all trying. Even the materialists cannot help appeal to metaphysical, to virtues, to things that transcend their ability to even understand what's going on, so.
Right. And then that yearning for, real truth, transcendent truth, leads them to this continual feedback loop of consuming materiality and trying to fill that void, which, it's a common, you're trying to fill the void of God. But it's like once you see, it's like, that's so true. It's really, really profound. It just takes a while to conceptualize it.
Yeah. Yeah, and the material can never do it. It just can't. It can't be the measurement, and it can't be the thing. And that's especially true if you believe that there's only material. So, yeah, and then from there, it's like, trying to locate the most cohesive story, and that's kind of what pointed me toward Orthodox. But at the moment, it's like I can't just rampantly defend something I didn't study or I'm not currently really delved into. Like, it would be a disservice to you or Jay or anyone else who's there's like what 4% of the country. So it's like, and I have that, and that's one of my weaknesses actually. Is like, first time I, found Jay, I pretty much tried to just like fully understand his arguments and what he was saying, and I just was like, it's like I have a new Tommy gun. Like I'm just gonna go like blast everyone, and I probably early on misrepresented certain arguments or made a fool of myself, but that's all learning too. I don't really care too much about that, but as far as like representing a full-on doctrine of belief, it's not where I'm at yet as far as like being able to push it, to be able to defend it, to be able to get into that nuanced discussion about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's a lifelong thing. I don't think it's designed to have like this end point in life where you're like, I got it. Because then you're just prideful. Like it's this weird dance.
It's the same cycle of the materialism, because if there's an endpoint, there's like a thing to it. There's a thingness,
right?
And it's not. There is no thingness. And I loved when you talked about, first of all, let me say I got a couple thoughts here, but when you were talking about how you didn't have anything to tell your children, really, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like the realization that you only want to give your child something that's true. And the realization that your life hadn't been in pursuit of truth, and now the realization that the only thing you want to give your child is what's true, is sort of redirected your own path. And then the embodiment of an individual trying to find out what's true, whether I get things wrong in my videos, or if you've misphrased things or said things wrong before, it's like that is less important than somebody who's honestly looking for truth. And if they're confronted, which people who watch my videos have confronted me with things that I've said true, I'm fine with it. There's not a competition, because I'm really interested in what's true. So if I get something wrong, tell me. I'm quickly to change my mind.
No, it's an amazing. It's a big distinction actually, because like Owen says once in a while, he says, I might be wrong, but I'm not lying. And it's such an important distinction, because
it is.
If you're really after truth, you might say dumb things. You might start looking toward things that aren't true. You might be willing to maybe accept something that's out there. It doesn't matter. The thing is, like, are you good? Are you a good person? Are you pursuing truth? Are you willing to pursue it and find out? And that starts with if we're pursuing truth and there is a truth out there and it precedes us, our ability to find it, that means it's been placed there. Otherwise, it's illusory. I've not had someone have a valid response to that, other than like, well, maybe it's a simulation, and then it's an endless regress there. But that's the thing, is like all wisdom comes from God. Like it's just you can't get away from the omniscient mind, because you're agreeing that something out there is true, that there's a knowledge, that there's information to gain that's true.
Right.
And trying to separate that from a mind is it's not a logical or rational thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, the truth matters, and our pursuit of it and how we do it matters, and teaching our kids. I also want to teach my kids that they are made in love, not just through God, but the act of sex with their mother and father, and that they have a spirit and a soul, and there is immaterial. There is more than what they're seeing here. Like, there's more than they can hold in their hand, and that's okay that it's okay that you can't materialize these things. And they're being taught the opposite. So they're being taught all is material. Like, none of that stuff exists. Let's pursue science, the doctrine of science. Like, that has to be combated actively. It's not just like, oh, I hope they get it. I hope they figure it out that they're mostly being told through all the main channels of information that they are a rat, a larger version of a rat, and through an unguided process, and everything they experience is nothing more than particle smashing. It's like, how can you take that approach and then be like, why are all these shootings happening? It's like,
Right.
what do you mean? What shootings? Why would it matter? You know what I mean?
Right.
Why does it matter if there's a mass shooting?
Right.
You can't adequately put those things together, those two arguments. You're just particles, nothing really matters. Why are all these mass shootings happening?
Right.
It's really basic to me.
Back to a total mind frame of incoherency. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, this isn't something I've dove too deeply in, but thinking about the sort of, symbolically within the Orthodox Church, the understanding of the empire, and then the church was a double-headed eagle. And I started thinking about secularism and sort of this fragmentation of society, of kind of why people aren't as interested in coherency, is that secularism itself, what Jay was trying to talk about with the Enlightenment, it creates these sort of spheres of rationalization, and that everybody just coherency for people is just whatever particular sphere they're in at that time, and not a larger understanding.
Right.
And I think maybe at a subtle presuppositional level, that's even tied to the theology between the state and the church, which post-Enlightenment is a total separation of. So we have totally different values here than we have values here, which if these values are true, they should also be here as well.
Yeah, it's impossible to separate the church and the state unless you just kill the church altogether, because this assumption that we should protect rights and there's liberty, you need an underlying assumption there that's metaphysical. Again, it's back to the transcendental argument, is that you can't possibly argue from a materialist perspective that we ought to protect rights,
Right.
that we ought to not kill each other, that we ought to not steal. That whole I'm still learning the time frame of it, but it really is starting to look clearly that man used language to just like I call it like a linguistic bridge. Like they took the bridge from the transcendent, used language, and got it to man as the source. Everyone, the rejection of God is the pursuit of man being God. You're never truly rejecting God. You're
Right.
always trying to find God. Like
Right.
even that. In some cases, you could argue even the pursuit or the privation of good is still in pursuit of what you think is good in some ways. Like
Mhm.
a lot of, the road to hell is paved in good intention. Like it all requires a standard for good. And that's why coherence is important, because can you imagine the debates, if they were held to coherency rather than like fact correspondence? Like,
Right.
can you imagine? It would be. They think that the debates are a joke now. If they had someone just using logic and being like, on what basis?
Right.
It's inevitably, once you get to the heart of the matter, it would be very hard for all of these people to argue their positions when confronted with the question, on what basis should we do any of this? And I don't know what happened. I don't know if politics were never of philosophy, and philosophy was always like the other side dudes in the room talking about stuff, and the politicians were always people who were paired with men who would just use force, and that's just how it's been. But yeah, we just need more logic. It just
Right.
should be taught,
And when
and
you
it should be on.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
No, go ahead. Didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just saying, like the correspondence version of truth is limiting.
Right. And
It's just limiting. It's going to appeal to itself, And that's the other thing I want to ask you. I asked Jay. I still don't understand it. The Gödel's incompleteness theorem
Mhm.
is a real theorem, but it's used as somewhat of like a metaphor in truth itself, in philosophy,
Right.
where you can eventually become circular in your argument. Even language itself is circular. Orange is orange.
Right.
What is orange? It's orange. And we were talking briefly about where you can use circularity and where you can't. And I'm trying to, because I'm visual, I try to understand like the domains in which circularity is not okay, and you can call it out, and the person is not allowed to appeal to Gödel, and then when you can. And I'm trying to look at it from like, how do you keep, I don't know if reducing is the right word. Like, how do you know when someone can appeal to circularity and be like, not like is why? In other words, let's take an example. Why is it not okay for Matt to just appeal to circularity of like, no, it just is. Like, that's ad hoc.
Right.
Like, is there a difference between ad hoc and circularity at that level? Like, can he just be like, no, it is because it is, or logic is logic. It just is logic. Like,
right.
When can they use it to their advantage?
From my understanding, to use your examples, actually it may work when you say logic is logic, because the Gödel incompleteness theory is regarding formal systems of logic. So if you're just appealing to something that isn't necessarily a formal system of logic, you can't. And especially if you're working on the classical foundationalist model, circularity is always going to be a problem because you're building up from a foundation. So there's this immense notion of progress with knowledge, whereas with the incompleteness theorem, and I'm no expert, but it's appealing to the circular nature of logical systems, formal logical systems. Like, you can't prove language without language, can't prove reason without reason, can't prove numbers without numbers, can't prove, and then from our understanding, as you've heard me say, you can't prove God, therefore, without the assumption of God. So, from my understanding, it's fair game to refer to his theorem when you're referring to complete systems of logic. But if you're trying to be arbitrary or ad hoc in your reasoning, and you're working off a classical foundationalist model, how you can't appeal to it, because because we're dealing with realms of logic. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, gotcha. That makes sense.
So when you're making the transcendental argument, because you're really saying that God is the source of all logic, he's going to take that same form that all the formal systems of logic would take. But you can't just refer to Gödel anytime there's a circular argument at hand, because most circular arguments aren't on the basis of a formal logical system.
That makes sense. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm asking because I like to be prepared for how, when that occurs in a conversation or a debate, so that it's so I can, manage it and be consistent.
Absolutely.
With my own statements and stuff. But I didn't fully, I understand it conceptually. I just, I try to lock it down, visually, where is it okay, where is it not okay?
And so,
can you do it, where can?
So we would say that, reason, obviously that's a sort of system of logic, numbers, language. So that's why, in regards to coherency, Jay references language, because language itself is a coherency, it's a web of coherent relationships. Right. And which is kind of symbolic of kind of the nature of what we're saying the world is through these coherent structures. So so basically that's, from my understanding, is why we can appeal to that and not ourselves making a circular statement, is because the theory is about all systems of logic. And so
right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But what you were saying, what I thought was really interesting, I've kind of lost half of it, but you're talking about, let me rephrase it in one way. Talking about progress. And so when we're talking about history, at least these are one of the things, at least in my mind, that I've been thinking about. I know this needs more kind of explication, but the movement away from God, or the way that we understand progress now, the way progress is framed in modern society, has really been a continual movement away from traditional norms, from a coherent theological understanding of the world, where progress itself can only be rooted in a movement towards or back to God. That's really the only, when we talk about progress, that is the only state of progress. So when we're talking about making these sort of logical, apologetical arguments, we're always appealing back to God, and God is sort of the end point. You were talking about, I think I was thinking about this when you were talking about the Logos and the divine mind and how all this stuff is rooted, which again, for us, truth then is a person. And that's why I think the revelation of personhood and how everything really falls together, it's so profound because it connects with the apologetical method of why Christianity is true, is that our God is extremely personable, right? So how can God love you if God isn't a person, doesn't have a personhood? How can, so then personhood is tied with our movement back, to God. I kind of lost where I wanted to go with that earlier.
Right.
You were talking about
starting with progress, the idea of progress,
and so you're talking about logical systems, the way language is used to be inverted, and God moving, man becoming God, which is the initial sin, right? This is the primordial sin of the garden, of Lucifer, the fallen angel, who had dominion over earth, right? He still has dominion over creation. But he chose to be in opposition to God because he wanted to be God. And so then progress in the world is always linguistically phrased as really a movement away from God. It's always movement towards disorder, towards degeneracy, towards the valorization of oneself, narcissism, and all these different forms.
It's so appropriately represented symbolically, like I don't know who originally pointed this out, but just like the bite of the apple is our Apple computer, leading us to the tree of knowledge, which is like the web. Like we're just constantly biting out of the tree of knowledge of the web through our apples, and they've created all these little, as Owen said in one rant, is like the little iPhone, the I this, the I that, I.
Right.
And we're just you get all of these things on our phone that make us look like Lucifer, like the morning star, the glorious angel. And we can do it. We're so beautiful. We can become the best. And that's like Peterson, his whole thing.
Right. It's extremely Luciferian.
You're going to being your best. And it's like, how could you argue about that? It's like, no, I'm not arguing with being your best. I'm arguing with how it's measured. What's the underlying?
Exactly. What is the best? And that would then lead to following God, which is real progress, which then is also a person. Which
Peterson also borrows the model. What I argue, people are always, why do you hate him? And I'm like, I don't hate him. I'm just saying that his use of God is not an argument of necessity logically. It's an argument of usage as a model, as like a player choice in a video game.
Yeah, well, it's very evolutionary. It's framed in a sort of evolutionary framework in the sense that, I believe God exists, I act as if God exists, because that worldview then makes you the most advantageous in terms of then psychological dispositions, health, all this stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's really trickery. It's just really it's dishonest, and I also wonder if how much of that he really believes, but we could never really know that. But yeah, that's just like using the ladder to get on the roof and pretending you jumped, but being like, there are ladders out there that work really well, but it's you evolving, it's you winning. It's like you evolved because you realized that this model works, but it's not true because it works. It just works, and you could make a lot of money, and you could do a lot of talks. And these things aren't easy. They require a lot of books and reading and online
a lot of rules.
Classes. Yeah. So it's all just the same Luciferian thing where you're just man is good. Good comes from man. It's just that circular pattern. And then we could measure it by the most good, which means the most men could be good by applying what we measure to be good according to the most people, and then just
what
gets into that format.
Yeah, which is utilitarian, which then once you get into a utilitarian framework, you're getting into sort of form of pragmatism. And then once you get in there at a governmental system, you're always going to be kind of predisposed to a sort of socialistic, a communistic framework, because that's the, again, at a presuppositional level, that's what you're working on when you're working off of utilitarian ethics or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, there's always just going to lead to unelected, like, aristocracies and symposiums on what we should do, and there's just, the council, it's like all of the worst stuff out of, like, what was it, not 1984, but the other one,
Brave New World.
Brave New World.
Okay, yeah, it was Aldous Huxley.
Good. That's all, like, how do we measure in real time what we then agree to be good, and then the pursuit of good is based on an if this is good, and then anyone who disagrees, we've already agreed on what's good here, people. Like, the majority rules. It's all the same stuff. That's why, like, the cohesiveness of Christianity in particular, it's like man is fallen. We make a separation between the immaterial, between this world and what is of the world and in the world. Like, such an important distinction, and then people don't like it because they're like, what do you mean? Like, how are you going to win? Like, how are you going to win the world? Like, what do you, like, that's so, like, it's not practical. They go right to pragmatism because you're like, how can you live your life not trying to dominate and win the world? And people now especially can't, I don't even know if it's now especially, it's like clearly demonstrable in the history of man. It's like the gear toward winning, you have to submit to the idea that this is all there is. You become animal.
Yes.
You can justify animal behaviors. The frustration, I get it, because from that worldview, you're like, what is wrong with you? Like, don't you know if you just signed up with, like, PragerU, like, you could make memes for a lot of money? Like, whatever. It's from that mindset. It's always the material, pragmatic mindset where you can actually make these distinctions. It really is reduced to that. It's like, you can point to any behaviors and any kind of doctrines or whatever, and you can just go, oh, that's material. That's material based. Right.
Did you get caught up with the sort of Peterson craze, like mid 2018?
At first, not too much. It was especially with, like, forced pronouns and language.
Right.
And I was really behind him there. And it took me a while to realizing that not only just him, but a lot of Jay's work is about showing how nothing that really becomes super popular doesn't have some underlying wing to it that's propping it up for a reason.
Absolutely.
And everyone's like, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's like, no, that's also the nature of man. If you're going to argue pragmatism, of course those things would exist. Like, that's the game. So
exactly.
There's this point.
The game that they want to win.
Exactly. And Owen calls them the approved. They're authorized.
Right.
They're authorized, which is why he started unauthorized. It's like a distinction between authorized and unauthorized is also somewhat of a metaphor for material and immaterial, where you're like, the people who are trying to win the material game will set up an authorization system. They will do it that way and exclude anyone who's pointing out things or doing, like, what do you call it? Like bad speak, bad thought, that kind of thing, criticizing the wrong people, wrong things. And it just keeps going back to that, like how it's very easy at this point for me to go, wow, that's from a materialist, pragmatic standpoint. Like, the whole thing is based on that, and there's nothing underlying. You can't justify, someone just sent me a whole paper on utilitarianism. He wasn't advocating for one or the other necessarily in the paper. He was determining, like, well, there's two kinds of utilitarianism. But the first sentence of it included the word, like, pursuing the good, and the good is never justified in that system. It can't be logically, cohesively justified in that system. It just, and again, you're professor would be like, why is why does it matter? Why is logical cohesivity or whatever the word matter? That's why it matters, because someone's going to say the good is X. We should do X. Based on all of our guns and military, we're going to do X. And you can't battle these things and realize how do you not even defeat them, because there is this weird fine line between rejecting what is in the world while you're in the world without becoming of the world. That's the battle I have, is like, how much do I fight this, the transgender, like, globo, homo grooming of young kids,
right?
Giving them, presenting sexuality to them and latching sexuality to their identity at, 5 years old. And my mom is very religious. She really knows the Bible, studies Judaism as well, and there's the fine line. There's probably an appropriate scripture even for it, but it's just that balance of like, how far do you participate in the beast system to beat the beast, versus living in the world and not of it, but still having a guard for those things.
Right.
Like, that also goes into like morality itself, where people want to put morality on a scoreboard, like, you've achieved morality. Like, it's defined. How do you put this? Like, it's defined. It exists, but it's also designed in a way where it's one-to-one for you to like discover and explore and to battle with. Like, it's part of morality. It isn't just this thing on the, like, let me reference today, like, what to do today, because you're always given circumstances and you're given situations, and the point is like that you acknowledge the good and you acknowledge the basis for good, and you realize when you've done something wrong. Like, I always use the example for murder. Like, you killed someone, they were trying to kill your kids. That doesn't make it moral that you killed someone. Doesn't make it that you didn't take a life, or how horrible that is, and all that comes with it. It means you can justify it in the material. You can maybe live with it, but it's also not you to make the judgment, of how immoral or moral it was. So even in the world of morality, you're constantly being baited into the material world to put a measure on it. You're pulled into that foundational model where you're like, and that's something that's very difficult to do with language and with debates. Like, it's easy to debate an atheist and debunk empiricism and materialism, but when you start arguing, like, well, what is the basis of morality, and how do we then measure it in reality? It's like this weird fine line of being pulled back into putting material measures on it. And it's like a trap. To me, it's a slight trap that we can fall into. I don't know. But again, that takes more studying for me.
And I think that truth resonates. So I think when we're talking about something like your comic, or what I try to do, or what Jay's doing with his channel and his debates, which I think are extremely helpful for people thinking things through, is that truth resonates, and truth has a source, and truth will eventually lead people to that source if they're actually authentically in pursuit of it. And so, at least from the Orthodox perspective of creation, the incarnation was the beginning of the process of deification of creation. So we don't have this kind of Gnostic dualism between the created world and the uncreated nature of the transcendent God, or something like that. And so I almost think it's time for us to become warriors. Like that's a strong archetype for us to start thinking about in terms of creating circles of communities online, of all this stuff, where inside that community is authentic order. And eventually that just resonates with people's lives when you encounter people, when they see how you live your life. And that spread is really the battle. Because I do think we're absolutely in a spiritual war. And so taking care, and this is maybe where Peterson might be actually useful in terms of taking care of your own house, cleaning your own bed, bucko, but
Yeah.
there's a truth to that I think, again, that's why it resonated with so many young men. And I think that the war,
Truth.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, he's always using enough nugget of truth.
Yes.
There's always enough in there.
Absolutely, and that's why doesn't Satan is known to be the greatest quoting of Scripture, is that
Right.
The manipulation of truth just a little bit, and that's why I think the theology, which I wasn't familiar with, but diving deeper and deeper and deeper with the help of people like Jay, in terms of orthodoxy, and then seeing the slow progression away from this original faith and this original dogmas and doctrine, and where then society and the historical events that just contextualize these continual movements, again, progress in the worldly sense away from God. But I think, like your comics and what we're trying to do online, I think the spiritual war is aimed at boys. It's aimed at men, and I think being more direct about that, and that's why I try to talk about masculinity fairly frequently on my channel. Even, of course, we're all working through these things and trying to better ourselves, but the global homo, the transgender stuff, the feminism, all this stuff is really attacking the men. And so when we look at the world, when we look at Turkey flooding Greece, the borders with the Muslim migrants, who's going to stand up? Who's going to defend the nation? Who's going to defend truth? And it always has to be, that's a masculine project. Men are called to do that. And so when we look at something like the Orthodox Church and the privileging of the masculine, which fast forward to 1960s, you get Jacques Derrida, the French intellectual, calling Western civilization phallogocentric. It privileges the phallus, and it privileges the idea of logos. Therefore, we need to destroy the patriarchy. And this is where the patriarchy idea, although it's already moving through, this is where the counterculture in the 1960s grabs a hold of it. Because then we have to do the opposite of the phall logo culture that Western civilization grew out of.
It's interesting because I always say that the opposition to natural order, to God's order, to hierarchical existing clear systems is always borrowing from them. Like I have this comic where it's like, I think with enough capital, with enough money and enough manpower, we can defeat capitalism and the patriarchy. Like you're always, you need men also to like once it's physical, like you need men also to defeat this so-called thing, which will probably, over a course of time, even if it happened, would just result in men at the top, just like transgenderism. Men are now competing and beating the crap out of women in sports and fights. The model, the clear truth of the matter is always going to show up, and it does. It's already done a full cycle in that regard. It's like, okay, men come back up on the top on the physical, scoreboard, and then but you're right, because it's getting men to a position where they feel like their aggression or their brute strength, how they stand in front of their family when maybe it's like they're not sure of a situation. Treating people like that's like wrong or not good, and training these men to essentially just be like to adopt their divine feminine, like to embrace their femininity. It's all on purpose. Like, yes. It's not just like it's utilized, and women follow men. So the whole pornography problem is a problem of man. That becomes the market. That becomes what women look to, like how to find a man. Like, oh, I need to do those things, or I need to, like that's what sexuality is now. And so it's always following men. Men lead. So if we're leading toward the degradation of patriarchy, then I mean we're pretty much seeing what that looks like now and where it's heading. I think it'll be rejected because, again, I also trust, yes, there's always battle and truth. You can't battle truth without using some of it. And so inevitably, like you said, the truth resonates again and again and again. And that doesn't mean like some terrible time it must happen or like does happen for that to be seen again. Again, that's to some extent out of our control. To some extent, we can directly impact it with our families and communities, but it also brings me back to that balance of like, yes, we need warriors, we need strong male role models, we need the order of men and God, we need a basis for morality. These things have to be transmitted in all directions, sideways through our communities, through people, and downward and upward through our families. And also, there must be a line that I don't know where you become of the world. I don't know what that is.
Right.
That's like a whole other, thing that's like a whole other podcast where it's like, when does it become of the world?
Right.
When do these actions, when do these pursuits become, I asked Jay this too, is like, when does the trap of pragmatism become apparent in theology? There must be a line where it's clear in all faiths where men misrepresent and then become this thing where it's like, well, if everybody was religious, then the world would be. Then it's basically like saying, like, if we can get Lucifer to just come back to church, then we can take his world. And that's just, there's no answer. It's like we can't really know. But
Right.
I think it's a really interesting inquiry that I'm always in because I don't want to be dictated by the material, but I live in the material, so
Right.
I am also.
Right.
It's this weird, yeah. It's a conundrum.
And when you're talking about, well, one of the things I recently came across a video of an Orthodox father talking about where are our heroes, and talking about how, again, the Orthodox Church, which the Protestant Church doesn't have, and then you look at Protestant nations, you look at Northern Europe, you look at England, you look at America, you look at Canada, these nations aren't Christian anymore. In fact, I think they have to be re-Christianized because there's something totally different. They may have Christian elements, they may have segments of the population at significant numbers who identify as Christian, but it's not a Christian culture, it doesn't promote Christian values. None of those nations do. And it's because they don't have saints, they don't have fathers, meaning church fathers, meaning actual figures throughout history to idolize. And so then we get Hollywood, we get, again, coming out of a Protestant nation of America. And so we idolize the world, and I think this is why then it being, evil, being so perceptive, is so conscientious of trying to change our idols to transgender, to queer individuals, to women specifically, because if the order, as we're talking about, that men actually do have a specific role in creation, and that men and women do have different roles, not that one is superior to the other in an ultimate sense, but that we do have different roles, the church's insistence on men being priests, on monks, again, privileging the masculine, is because that's their role. Adam, the myth of Adam and Eve, or the story of Adam and Eve, because we believe it to be also historical to a degree. So he was the priest of creation, and this is what the incarnation of the Logos, the incarnation of Christ, had to recorrect, is that man was supposed to be the priest, and because of his decisions, because of him even following a woman, right? There's a symbolic level there in terms of acquiescing to something he knew he wasn't supposed to do on the behest of Eve herself, because there's a whole theological discussion on would the fall ever have happened if Adam didn't eat the apple, because that's when really things go haywire. And so men just being loud and proud about being a man and not apologizing, I think is essential to the maintenance of our culture. And then the globalists, the evil powers that be, realize how all this stuff, they feminize the West, and then they flood them with masculinized Arabs, right? Or that are coming with a totally different worldview, that they're not even playing that game, and those who are in control are totally aware of that. And so...
Yeah, it's so fun. It's so true. And some of the people that follow Owen get so mad at him when he says, like, no, well, it's not the agreement of the doctrine of Muslims. It's that they're, like, when he says they're based, is because they know how to keep their belief structure in a cohesive manner in reality.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it transcends. I was talking about this on a stream just directly to my audience, is that traditions and religions and how they play out in societies and cultures often transcend law. The law reflects those things, like, but they transcend law. In other words, it's not even about making something illegal on the street. It's that you live in a culture that already, like, has that social shame or something in place that's like, that's not allowed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that thing doesn't come from the law. It comes from these from strong cultures that are governed by men.
Yeah.
That are, you know, like and people get so like, they have to understand it from a different perspective. Like, when you look at other cultures and religions and how they operate, it's important to distinguish between agreeing with the practices and agreeing with their ability to do it. You know what I mean? Like, to be able to implement these kind of laws that are social laws that, again, transcend. You know, like I was talking about, like, suddenly after the 60s, we made it okay for everyone in society to look like a homeless person.
Right.
Like, and just be, like, dirty and not put together. And you're basically allowing and marketing the loss of dignity in humans. Like,
yes.
You know, it's fine. It should make us look like... It's like, no, there's something so amazing and godly about being put together, about being modest with your body, about you know, being impeccable, like,
right.
Especially like men and women out in the world, impeccability, and some of that's coming back, but unfortunately, impeccability also gets hijacked with vanity too. So it's misrepresenting what it's representing. And
it's that fine line you were talking about.
You know,
it's so difficult.
Just being in the image of God, not that, like, God should wear, like, a suit with a Gucci watch, but that you respect your body, you respect it as a gift, that you represent it well, I guess to say. But yeah, there's something about that that goes unnoticed by most people, because they're just like, whatever, this is it, man. We're changing, we're evolving. Like, you know, things are all going to be different. Like, then this goes with the transhumanist stuff and the trans speciesist stuff, and this idea of progress equates change with good always, which is why, like, Obama won. Just assume change is good. And you like, look at history and you're like, someone was cheering change a lot of times, and it wasn't good.
Right.
So there's something there as well, that you have to convince people that the change you want is good. And more people, even Bill Maher, I don't know if they recognize the cause of it. They never got into it, but he was on Joe Rogan, and I just saw a clip, and he was talking about growing up in the city in the 50s, how amazing it was. And there was no crime, and you come home and you change, you go outside, and your mom doesn't even know where you went. And people talk to each other and apologize, and, like, there's all this etiquette that's built in to it, and that thing's been jeopardized by a lot of different angles and a lot of different decades. It's really it has to be battled, like, to some extent, but at the same time, it never occurs at a national level. It's not. It has to be outward. It has to be family. It has to be.
Well, it's personal. Back
it
to
generations. Back
to what we were talking about with love. Back to what we're talking about with God and Christianity. Again, it's kind of unique emphasis within world religions as a personhood. that it always comes back to the individual seeking these things in the way that they, their hygiene, the way they present themselves, their pursuit of knowledge, the coherency, the consistency in which they live their life. It's just, we live in such an interesting time, and I remember the clip you're talking about that Bill Maher doesn't even. It's like talking to the atheist about the tag argument. There's such a disconnect between okay, well, what allowed that society to flourish so well? What was it about their common interests and goals and culture?
Yeah, no, I made a comment on the clip. Joe Rogan is going, yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. Have you ever done DMT or all these drugs? I'm gonna take a commercial break to sell a pocket, whatever sleeve.
Pocket pussy.
Toy. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, what happened? Why were things so great? I have a picture of my dad, probably 11 years old at maybe Coney Island or one of those fairs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his aunt and his mother are standing behind him, and he's got a gun in his hand and he's shooting cans, but the picture is taken in front, so the gun is facing somewhat off. And I asked him about he was shooting a .22 caliber at a fair at cans. That's, it's not just a testament of where we've gone safety wise. We'll maybe take better precaution because of what could happen. Those are all rational positions. But the fact that no one would ever suspect he would just start shooting people is an underlying thing that's beyond that.
Right.
It's like the sanctity of life and understanding the value of humans is 100% correlates to theology.
Right.
And the departure of it 100% correlates with us believing we're just bacteria and smashing particles. And I don't see how anyone could disagree with that.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't understand how anyone who just can reduce us to material could argue any kind of ethical, moral, transcendent claim at all. They just can't do it. And from that perspective, I don't know how to get more people in the position where they can go, well, Joe, what do you think it was? What's missing? What's the common denominator here? What's going on?
I think to a degree, one of the reasons why people don't see it as obvious as it is because of the consequence of you becoming responsible for yourself. What does it mean if God exists? What does it mean if there's a particular order that you should live in? What does it mean if there's actually morality? What if there's actually a judgment after? What if this life means actually quite a bit? And those consequences are so profound for people that I think they live in, again, part of the secular, the secular and the state, or the church and the state, the secularism, it's like these fragmentations of mind, these fragmentations of perspective, is that they don't want to address what the consequence is. And I think that's for the majority of our culture. And that's for, again, just like the professor, that's the people who don't even want to deal with coherency. Why does that matter?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does matter. It really does matter. Coherency matters. Because the correspondence theory of truth relies on coherency anyway.
Yes.
So, you know what I mean?
Before you can do the correspondence, you have a coherency of logic and induction, all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, so those things are kind of together. And it's just a matter of convincing people through their own. It's really it's almost like the best argument is from absurdum, from the alternative.
Yeah.
It's always showing the absurdity of arguing that you exist, which is always inevitable. Sam Harris has to get to a point where he doesn't exist and he's not signing books and it's not his bank account.
Right.
Okay, you want to build a world on that view? Coherency matters now, right?
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Give me your paycheck. Give me it.
When you bring that up, it reminds me of the intellectual dark web, and I got swept up in that, not for a little bit, because as soon as I don't know. It was a brief few months period where I thought the intellectual dark. I was really swept away with not Brett. What's his brother's name?
Harvey.
No. Eric.
Brett
Eric.
and,
Eric.
Yeah.
I was really captivated by him, even though he's kind of a leftist and all this stuff. But I think there was like this false middle ground for the intellectual dark web, is that they were like recognizing the contentions of people that were still had presuppositions, if you will, based in the sort of older Christian worldview. But they really, deep down, the whole intellectual dark web, we're not even going to address the high numbers of members from a particular tribe, but they really are all left of center. And really, it became so obvious after a few months of just kind of consuming that type of material that it was just another form of gatekeeping. And what it was bringing it was getting all those kids that were enamored with Peterson, that were finding responsibility, taking account for themselves, and then getting them and kind of ushering them in over to a more progressive worldview. But at the same time, we understand you. We understand you. Thank God for you guys. You guys have discussions. We can have this talk. This talk is so important. We're having this talk, and then once you see it, it's like it's all a game. It's all a game.
It's totally, and it's all marketing, and it's just, now it's funny where I just look at the lineup of that, and I'm like, is this like Portlandia for intellectualism? And again, like Owen was brought into that, Owen Benjamin, and so the distinction that I see is that one is based on strictly correspondence theory of truth, and then Owen came in and started spouting coherency.
Yeah.
And just going, well, does this make sense? Or, like, can I say this truth or this truth? And like, they're like, no, we can only have without them knowing it, they're saying, no, we just need the correspondence theory. We just keep it immaterial, don't get crazy. And then you got booted. But you're so right. It's just it's all gatekeeping, and people get triggered when you say that, because they're like, pushes you into this like conspiratorial world where, well, what do they get out of it? It's like, it's all just control narrative. People have to understand that money, yes, people can do things for money, and people can do things for power, but the true power is in narrative. Like, if you can convince, which is funny because getting people away from coherency is still a form of coherent thinking for that person, for that entity doing it, in other words. So it makes sense, if you're going to control the narrative of a bunch of people, you have to be somewhat coherent in your process. Like, it has to make sense that you can do it, and so that's kind of the irony, is that the gatekeepers don't represent the full scale of what truth and the pursuit of truth is and presupposes. They don't acknowledge the preconditions underneath it, but they have to abide by coherency the entire time to keep it afloat at the same time. But they just have to stop you from going down a different door, which is justifying the Transcendentals, justifying them just at all. And then you're trapped. Like, if any of those guys get confronted by a good questioner at an event, just stick it to them. If anyone's listening that goes to one of their events, ask them to justify all the entire transcendental category. Yeah, seems reasonable.
Exactly. Exactly. Their only recourse is a pragmatic utilitarian definition of logic, which Sam Harris would be the easiest culprit to kind of pick on in regards to them. He believes in the inerrancy of logic and mathematics, so account for it. And then they'll say, well, we don't. Well, because God is off the table for them. They'll say, well, we can't account for them. We just have to assume of their applicability and their usefulness. But
they'll say their little fun retort is, what choice do I have? Someone said, does free will exist? And they said, what choice do I have? And it's like a fun deflection, but also just supports that there's free will in the end.
Right.
So just that's ad hoc, like just being like, what choice do I have? It's like, no,
Right,
like,
especially when you deny free will, yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's funny and cute, but it's yeah. The Sam. I mean, actually, Sam Harris. One thing I listened to him that I always talk about on these podcasts is one of the moments where I really saw the problems is that he was asked, if there's no free will and morality is a construct, how do I teach my kids to live a good life and make good decisions? And he said, you lie. He said, you lie.
Yep.
So, in really
I remember
simple
that.
form, from Sam Harris's point of view, religion is bad because you're lying to your kids, right? So, but if morality and free will is an illusion, lie to your kids anyway. It's like, you can't have both of those. You just can't have both of those. So that's why coherency is important, because, like you said, people relate to and have a, what did you say, like there's something about truth that they...
I think it resonates.
Right?
Yeah, it resonates. People can feel when something's true.
Audio.
Yeah, I said it resonates. People can feel when something's true.
Right, and that means that they can feel when it's not, hopefully some of the time.
Right.
So in that moment, if I recognize that didn't work for me, there's someone in the audience who's like, wait, Sam Harris just totally sold out on his entire worldview with one question.
Yeah.
So does that mean anything for a internet, the intellectual dark web who's pursuing truth via coherency?
Yeah.
Like via logic, math, science, empiricism, and they know it. The good news about someone like Sam Harris, and this is where like faith and understanding all come in, is it's important to know the difference between making a person, humans, the enemy, and sort of ideas or the privation of good or the departure from logic, the enemy. And someone like Sam Harris and even Stefan Molyneux, they know that it matters, that it's logically incoherent to not be able to justify morality. And so they try to do it in pragmatism and in Sam Harris's well-being. He tried to create a model.
Yeah.
In the moral landscape, Stefan tried to create the model in UPB. Like it fails, but it's good. It serves a purpose. They're basically doing the work for themselves and for us. Is that okay? This doesn't work. And then you get atheists like the Rationality Rules guy on YouTube. He totally goes after Sam Harris and goes after Stefan, because what they're doing is trying to make a case for morality objectively, because they know. Why would they make the case for morality objectively? Because they can't live a life pretending that it doesn't exist.
Right.
That's not real. That it's not something that's incredibly important to everything we do, every interaction, every argument that you want to make. Otherwise, you reduce yourself to a robot who can't make ought claims ever.
Right.
We can't justify ought claims. I would assume there are people and entities that exist who would love to create a culture that can't make ought claims.
Well, I think that...
Why build robots?
Right. To a degree, I think that's what relativism is that is the ultimate goal of the spiritual warfare, is that it's sort of it comes down to, in my opinion, I could be overstating it, but this is just the way that I'm seeing a lot of this stuff unfold, is that it has to do with relativism and the distinction between things and good and evil becoming the same thing. And from there, you're basically back into, might is right. And that's right. It. And if you are Satan, if you are, the personification of evil, and you have dominion over this realm, that's the game board you want to be on.
Oh yeah, might is right is a good, which is really interesting how libertarianism, anarchy, it's all in the name of liberty and freedom, yet the end goal is the worst possible end goal. Right.
It's this linguistic facade we were talking about earlier with man becoming God, and how these,
right.
Again, to me, it's all part of the progressive history post 1054, if you will.
Right.
And so since then, it's to me it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Right. Yeah. It makes total sense. Actually, you don't even need to really like engineer it in your head. If you just reject God and everything that's required to justify acts and morality and all these things, that, like you said, it's inevitable. You don't even need. All you have to do is start participating in life that way. And I see it like a funnel, like a toilet, like a flushing, and you inevitably find yourself. It's not like people just can utilize it better and take advantage of people. And you could market it and push it, and that's all happening. But it doesn't take much. It just takes rejection of objectivity of these things. And you eventually are helping that cause get to its logical end, and that's utilitarianism. Someone deciding what is good as a person versus we're discerning it from a source.
Right.
So, yeah, it's all great stuff, though. It's exciting to be in a time where we can provide arguments and worldviews that help people and are cohesive and coherent.
Right.
And really, that's all just from that. It's like a lot of the work comes from just that, because people really are impacted when they see an inconsistency for the most part. Like your professor won't be, or some people won't be. But people who are pursuing some sort of truth, when they're confronted with specifically the transcendental argument, there's only two ways to go. Is put yourself in the inquiry that something else is possible, that you don't know, or resort to that nothing can be known and you don't really exist. It's really, I mean, the choice is obvious. You have to be open to that something else exists, and then use logic from there what do you call it? Separate the wheat.
Yeah, wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, so it's all good news too. It's like a lot of the stuff we see and a lot of stuff I report on through memes could be seen as like black pills, or like this is so bad, but it's really just showing the separation, and there's always an opportunity to reveal the inconsistency or contradictions upon which these things exist. That's the important thing. It's not just pointing out the thing. It helps to point out why the model of that thing is invalid and it won't work actually. And get people on the side of like, it's important to not put people in the same position that the media puts people in, which is like reactive, fear-based. We got to do something.
Right. Coronavirus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the cold.
But
Common cold.
But I think for me at least, it's almost symbolic the year is 2020, because it seems like more like just, again, I'm sure this has always been the case in history, but just for me symbolically, just being able to see reality more clearly, and then the emails I get from people on the same journey that I was on through East Asian traditions, through psychedelics and drugs, through occultism, through all these kind of spiritual but not religious, and then somehow this ends with a radical transition in your lifestyle and your perspective to really going back to the thing you were rejecting from the beginning, which is God, Christian morality, all these things. Specifically, would lead to orthodoxy, but generally it's just this kind of return back to Christendom and realize the thing that we were running away from, most of us as adolescents, is the thing that allowed us to be different when we were out in the world with the other people. It was still those values and those moralities and those perspectives that allowed us to interact with people and say, well, in our heads maybe thinking, well, you're a little off. I wouldn't do that, but we didn't put it together, and now it's like 2020, and the whole Trump phenomenon has clued in a whole generation of Gen Zers who not just see the deep swamp of them trying to get Trump, but now seeing that Trump and his attachment to Israel and Jewish, like the perspective is it's zooming out further and further and further and seeing the whole complexity of the state of the world, and then the result of that is, I just take responsibility for myself and follow God, and then it leads to Christianity, really following Jesus Christ.
Well, it's a moral issue. It's all morality. That's why I get people get caught up into like what should we do and who are we going to vote for and all this stuff, and it's really easy to just get right back to that the abstract. I see a similarity between trying to talk your way out or think your way out of this the larger view of complexity that's going on versus the one-to-one. Like the video you did about one-to-one expression of love, like like the inversion of that is everything we've seen from the 60s music. One Love, it's all inversion. All of Bono's things, all of the things they do.
John Lennon, Imagine.
Yeah, all of it. It's all turning love from a one-to-one to the abstract one is all, and then you can, like, it removes you. It's a cop-out.
Right.
So that if you just think one love. But similarly, with our own actions toward morality, one-to-one, making sure that we make meaningful moments and conversations with people in the physical world, one-to-one, and showing who is that person. Like, what does that person believe that they're so kind or, so present and looking me in the eye, and there's something there. And people notice the kind things, especially now, because we're so used to just like battling and calling names right away on the internet.
Absolutely.
People are refreshed by just decency, and decency is a moral claim. So we should be decent. Anyone who argues against that, someone might be like honest with themselves and be like, no, I don't believe in anything. There's no reason to be decent. Just use force, whatever. But anyone who wants to be decent should be looking also for a way to justify why. And so it all leads back to God. And so, if you're, rejecting that concept, you're probably rejecting it not on the basis of coherency, but on the basis of materialism. The fact that you can't materialize a God, you cannot use the classical foundational model to prove a God physically. And so a lot of the sort of allergy to theism is really based on a lot of narratives, even a lot of Christians and other religious people being somewhat stuck in just that model. And so you can't ever open the door to people as far as talking about it in a way they can accept the conversation itself. Because if you just start with, God exists because of these natural phenomenons, and it's like all that, it's just going to go into facts against facts.
Right.
And you can't start there. You just can't start there. I don't think anyone's ever started there. Yeah. And if they did, they're eventually going to find logic and either add on it, or they're going to be like, well, when I first kind of just said blindly yes to this idea, I didn't really look at it like from a logical necessity, coherency versus correspondence model, which will always become a battle of interpretations of the past and the present. And so that's I could say like almost every argument online is just a classical foundationalist facts, trying to fight facts over and over again. There's almost no, in a way, there's almost no use to it until you get to the face-to-face with someone who also is trying to justify specifically what theism is more coherent. Otherwise you're just arguing for something to exist that you have already admitted is immaterial, spaceless, timeless.
Right.
Like, that doesn't seem logical to me. So, William Lane Craig, it's time for you to start from a new argument, if you hear this.
Right. No, absolutely. You can't start in that. And you know this. I mentioned that in the tag video. But when you start with the classical foundationalist model, you're playing on the same playground as the atheist, and so there's no real movement there. And it's not that we're against classical foundationalism once we establish that God exists, and that's why we're actually able to perceive truth through induction. The scientific method works. That's only because God exists, and that's why doing the cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument. That's what he's kind of famous for, is that, well, everything that has a beginning has a cause. This is kind of the threefold model for the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything beginning has a cause, the cosmos has a beginning, and therefore the cosmos has a cause. This is the cosmological argument, which it all logically follows, yeah. But it's like, that isn't going to get somebody who's totally bought into the Big Bang Theory, who's an atheistic materialist. So they would just say, yeah, the cause isn't God, though.
Yeah, they could just do the multiverse cause.
Exactly. They just push the step back.
Regress.
Push it back a step.
Endless regress physically. He does at least get to, well, nothing can like, if you start arguing what the cause is, you're going to have to find a moment where it doesn't keep going back, endless regress. And the only way to justify the beginning of everything, it can't begin with something in the material,
right,
time,
exactly,
space sense. It can't. So, and I don't know if infinity is an option logically. I haven't explored that, like, because we can't conceive it. So how can we conceive? I don't know. It gets into craziness there.
No, absolutely. How can, and this gets in arguments about the universe and how I think, Jay always says space is fake and gay, but how we kind of then we talk about the universe with the same kind of epithets that we would use for God. Infinity, it's eternal, these type of things. And we're talking about materiality, which by definition, in their own argument of the Big Bang, it couldn't be because it has a beginning. Therefore, it can't be infinite. It can't be eternal. And it's just interesting how they fall back into these same problems. It's just consistent.
Yeah, it's all becomes a coherency issue. Is that picture in the back with that shape? Is that the shape Jay talks about, where it's a thing you can't imagine in your head, like the shape with all the sides that you can't possibly think of in your head, but we know exists? I forget what he calls it.
I'm actually not sure what that. It kind of looks like a Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome, but
right.
I forget the exact name of that structure. These are actually from. It's actually part of what we're talking about. Is sort of. It's called the Imaginary Foundation. It's like this whole artistic platform that really pushes kind of scientism and kind of like the psychedelic worldview. But I specifically like these. It's just a guy smoking and reading a book on the sands of time. That's what this one's about. And then this one is just called Study, and it's this guy drawing all this cool stuff. But the company that actually makes all these promotes a sort of transhuman, space-veering humanity that's moving into the future that has to, blend with machine, which is, again, part of the whole man becoming God, because man has dominion over matter, dominion over machine, blending with machine, then is man becoming something beyond just beyond what he is. And so the fact that he's blending with his own creation is theological, really. I mean, it's the full realization of man as God. And so I think that's why Silicon Valley is so invested in that narrative.
Well, too bad it's a Faustian deal. It's like, you're gonna it's a funny thing. Everyone gets excited about the Neuralink. Everything that Elon Musk says is going to happen, they just get super excited. But it would be. I always thought of the funny reality of that, where it's just like two vegetables basically like linked together, and they're like, I also smelled potatoes. That was the extent of the capabilities. And they're like huge breakthrough, and it's like rewritten about differently.
My gosh.
Like two people enjoy the same food, and it's like they're not actually enjoying it because there's no agency between the multiple minds. So it's that's the other thing about this trans stuff is the theys, and this is something I got from Owen, is that this language of theys creates not us and one to one.
Right.
Creates a language of theys.
Back to personhood.
They out there, and the same thing. I fall for it too, where I use the term they to represent like some entities that are trying to do stuff, and I can't really name them each. But it's better if you can name them each of them, and be like, this person is trying to do XYZ. They have a company that does, it's much better to do that. But I thought that was interesting. Another linguistic sort of bridge, I call them, where you change the language to then operate inside the paradigm that you're pushing, and they removes the one to one. It creates this hive mind, and it allows people, and they're just talking about it from the gender's perspective, but that's how these things get introduced. It starts with just the term,
right?
Like the word meme also, like, it never existed the way we understand it now. It was just like, it still has the similar definition. It's just like, when I first was into like futurisms and stuff, it was like a meme was just a unit of information transmitted, culturally or through whatever. And a meme is still that technically today, but we would never, it's different. It's like, we look at a meme visually, like that's a meme. We don't look at it and go, that's a unit of information transferred. Anyway, that's just like rambling on how language doesn't always turn out the way it gets introduced. Like, it's utilized differently in the future.
And that's why language is the battleground, really. And when you're talking about the people who had identified as they, I noticed this, just especially going on college campuses, doing research, is the people that would be in favor of the sort of they pronoun, with the septum piercing, with the blue and purple hair, with the multiplicity of tattoos, or however they want to kind of scarify themselves. They are the least individualistic, yet at the same time perceive themselves to be the most individualistic within the framework of wherever setting they're at. That these things, these markers that they're exemplifying to the world, they think makes them unique, but really their opinions, if you start to get in the nitty-gritty, they are literally a copy, paste, and cutout of what the culture is wanting you to be.
Right. Yeah. That's like the NPC.
So when you're talking about the doing away with personhood, or the one-to-one relationship, it matches up so perfectly as a sort of a semiotic structure, that they do these things that represent their individualism. They use the pronouns like they, which kind of absorbs the individualism into a generality. And then really there's nothing individualistic about them, because they're like everybody else. They consume culture. And this has been a big marker for me when I interact with people, is that just through normal conversation, I'm always trying to gauge how much culture do people consume, because that's going to really dictate a lot of their worldview.
Right. Yeah. And what culture it is. And and that's why even like Breitbart, he was always about culture. He always saw that policies were always downstream from culture, and that if you could normalize something, you could then push policies and big projects. And that's why CIA and all the stuff Jade talks about.
Yeah, look at homosexuality. Just 20 years ago.
The whole thing. Yeah. And you make it trendy, which is good news and bad news, because I saw a thing that was like 3,000% up. Kids between 5 and 12 or whatever are identifying as not like trans, like but the thing is, like, when you push culture like that, you're pushing a not truth and trying to get a result that's consistent with what you're pushing. So it's like, to some extent, I never get too crazy, because I'm like, it's coming from a lie. So you're trying to push a lie, something that's just not true, that's not cohesive, that's not coherent, that has no supporting foundation, tradition, or theology underneath it to support it. So it's just a trend. So when you get these spikes of people like identifying, in their college days, maybe I'm gay, maybe, I don't know, I'll identify that that's possible. And then they get and then they try to push it based on those like polls, and it's all mostly nonsense. That's the thing. It's like the fear or the reaction, or what it's representing, isn't nonsense, but the reality of it is mostly nonsense. But it still needs to be combated.
Mm-hmm.
So this is weird balance between understanding how media pushes the most extreme versions of things as if they're happening like everywhere to some extent, but then you have to really investigate. If you interact with that, it's manufactured, and it's not true, it's manufactured consent. You're then saying this is happening everywhere, and by doing that, in a way, you're working against your own interests, because you're starting from the point of, see, this is happening everywhere, and then they could run with it. It can happen everywhere, versus going, that's nonsense. It's being propped up by all these companies, and for this reason, but it's not going to sustain, and it's going to get rejected. Like, I'd rather take that route than the reactionary route, which I've also taken before.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And maybe in a way to sort of wind down this conversation, regards to the forces of media, the forces of the cultural controllers, people like to use the term oligarchs, is that the culture then that should be being consumed is the family structure, the nuclear family. And that's kind of the source of values. And that's kind of the epicenter of the fight. And I was curious if you wanted to say anything in regards to sort of your journey within sort of spirituality, masculinity, and then becoming a father, and how that's changed everything for you. Because as a single man who aspires to have a family, I'm not living that lifestyle, but that to me is where you've actually become fully a man, and it's in that place in which you're actually really fighting against the people who control the culture, because you're raising people up that you're going to instill values with them, that they themselves are going to be agents. Maybe using a little bit too militaristic terminology there, but they are sort of cultural agents for what's good, for the truth, for God, for that nuclear value structure.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to say anything about that.
Well, based on, just to relate it to my own work, like when I first started doing memes, all I said to myself is, I want to do something that's like funny and truthful and like, resonates with people. And I know that what I have to do is be prolific. And prolific is sometimes conflated with like amazing or like super, and all these other terms, but prolific in the sense of what the word means, which is just make, proliferate. And through proliferation and repetition, you get better. I got better at seeking the truth, knowing what the arguments are, replicating it, and then eventually getting to a place where it became spiritual, because I've exhausted, again, the correspondence realm, where it's like, let's talk about facts, and then now it's gotten to like, let's talk about philosophy and logic and what all these things are sitting upon.
Right.
And then that leads, once I'm led into that realm, it leads you to a transcendent realm and a spiritual realm, just automatically. If you pursue truth, you will find your way there. If you don't find your way to spirituality and God, you've stopped at a door.
Yeah.
You've stopped, and you've just stopped. Just like someone who stops and says, well, no, I'll just question logic then. Like Matt Dillon stopped. He stopped.
Exactly.
Matt, you stopped. I'm sorry, but you stopped. So when I had a kid, it's just all like it's almost like a fractal, or like a one resolution view out of the same thing. I'm proliferating. I'm making a child. I'm replicating. I will be teaching. I'm teaching. I'm being this person that believes this stuff and tries the best of my ability to live consistent with it. Basically, children are sort of masters of integrity, because they know when you're lying. They know when you're not your word. And that's another element to this, where words matter, language matters, and that all has to be justified too. So basically, that whole process got me to the place where being a man is pursuing truth and defending it, like, vigorously. Pursuing truth and leading other men and women toward truth, and understanding that you don't have the truth. You discern it, and it has to be given to you. Its wisdom comes transcendentally. It's impossible. Otherwise, it's illogical. If not, we are not discovering anything. We are creating an illusion, an interface to make us feel like we're doing something. And if that's the case, you don't have kids, because you're not going to be able to. What are you going to tell them? What are you going to? You can't tell them that they're nothing, that nothing's true. And so being a man is confronting that you're a man, that you're just a man. Being a man is confronting the fact that wisdom doesn't come from man. That's the manliest thing you can do,
right,
is accept that wisdom doesn't come from man.
Right.
It comes from God.
Yep. Paul talks about how the wisdom, the knowledge of this world makes men foolish. And
Right, exactly.
it always will. Which then leads to the structure of the tag argument, kind of bringing back the conversation full circle, is that you begin the conversation with God. You begin the apologetic with the assumption of God.
Right. Yeah, and you can, because all presupposition, like everything you're trying to prove, you have to presuppose it exists. Just like the other argument against it, like where people go, well, if God existed, why would all this suffering exist? If God existed, why would he take so much time in his design? And they just like place all of this human concern onto a being.
Right.
But again, it's the same thing. It's like you have to presuppose the existence of knowledge. God, I don't see any difference. That's why I don't see a difference between God and knowledge, love, all of these immaterials. And I have no problem connecting them into one entity. If you assume knowledge, you're already assuming something as big as God if you're a materialist, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, why would you assume that this thing called knowledge that's transcendent to man, but we can discern it, and all of these laws that are inerrant, and all of these the logic and math and number theory and all these things that are so consistent in our perspective and our experience, just if you're adhering to them at all and you have no justification, you're already doing what a theist does.
Right.
So don't act like you're don't act like you're not doing it just because it's not a person, that you're not making it a mind. You're doing the same thing. You're just not justifying it.
I totally agree. And last thing I'd want to say is just in regard to your comment there that you talked about how you equate knowledge with God. From the Orthodox theology, the difference between logos and logoi is that knowledge, love, truth, these things are logois. These are uncreated energies of God coming through the logos. And so from the Orthodox perspective, they'd say, yes, absolutely. There isn't, because when you interact with those Transcendentals, you're interacting with sort of the outreaching of God himself, the logos. And right. So it's through those mediums that we actually get back to the logos. That's how we know what the logos is. And then it's through the logos that we know the Father, the source of the essence of the Trinity. And so when Christ says you can't get through the Father except through me, I mean, it makes so much more sense that, I can't even get to God except through logic, except through right. these various Transcendentals. And so right. From the Orthodox perspective, and that's why it's so profound, because you don't ever hear a Protestant talk that way. You don't ever hear a Protestant try to talk about the Trinity or Christ in that way, which then it just brings so much meaning into lived experience when you're actually interacting with right. these Transcendentals.
Right, and that where they come from in a logical way.
Right.
And that doesn't mean faith doesn't go away. I think a lot of
right.
people who
right.
are resistant to God, they are uncomfortable with faith because they're stuck in that model. All they have to do is realize that they have faith in something equivocal to God, which is knowledge, wisdom, truth itself. All you're doing is you just created the thought bubble, like in my comics. Like you're adhering in you're seeing a thought bubble with all those terms, and it has even the pointing toward a mind. All you're doing is just holding your hand up against the picture of the person or the thing, that you're, the problem is once they get to that point, then they're going to be like, oh no, now I have to discern what God. And that's probably a lot of, even with myself, where I'm
right.
like, I'm not a relativist. I grew up Christian. I know that that Christianity makes the most cohesive sense because of how they operate, how you just described those things, and how it makes sense that a man would be consistent with God because we're made in the image. That makes sense. How we know to have dignity and love for each other and express it. How that doesn't make sense through like a six-handed elephant. Like it does.
Right.
Why would I? You know what I mean? I wouldn't trust. It has to all make sense. Like why? And Jay is so much. I have so much to study to dispute the other things, but this is just me, novice base level, what I know, where I know where it's consistent, and then you get into the historicity, and that gets into tougher ground, So
Right.
you have to but people assume that that's where you have to start. You don't have to start. Like if anyone's following Jordan Peterson, it means that they're already driven toward something transcendental.
Yes.
They are looking, that they want something that's bigger,
Right.
than themselves.
Yeah, that's really
okay.
perceptive.
And he's you just have to like I say, he pulls people out of nihilistic South and then points them to East and West in a back and forth of chaos and order.
Right.
But he's calling it North. That's his only problem.
Oh, that's a great visual metaphor right there.
That's where his lie is, and I think he knows it, and I think he's going to eventually come to terms with it.
Right. If he isn't dealing with it right now. I mean, with his drug addiction. I mean, again, given that it's 2020, it's so interesting to see, where the Vox Days and the Owen Benjamins and the Jay Dyers, and I'm trying to start creating content in sort of this same milieu, and where numbers of the Gen Zers are going with, the whole Groyper movement. And, I may have disagreements with some of that stuff, but where that's all movement, and then you look at where's Peterson at in 2020, and he's dealing with a drug addiction that nobody knew he had, while he was in the spotlight making millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So, well, brother, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really, really great conversation. I hope everybody's enjoyed as much as I did.
Thank you for having me on.
No, brother, I really appreciate it. I've been a big fan, like I said, of your work since right before you went on with Owen Benjamin, and it's been really nice to be able to have a conversation with you and sort of build a sort of personal relationship, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's good to know. It's cool that you followed that long, because you probably saw some of the progress where I started and it was very just libertarian. It was like my safety zone. Like I'm not a Democrat, but you can't attack me because I'm just a classical liberal.
Right.
Like shield, Yep. And then that all just fell apart once I looked at that doesn't do it.
Right. And that's for me, and that's why like people like the Sargon of Akkad, who at one time I'd actually engage with some of its content with that sort of classical liberalism, and then as I've progressed on my journey, it's like I don't even care like that. Like, I don't even care about what Not that I don't think that he is an intelligent individual. I'm just saying that
right.
that worldview. It's like I don't even want to engage with it. You're not even beginning at the same place that I'm beginning from. We're not going to end at the same place either.
Right.
Like
exactly. Yeah.
So.
Core. Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. That's it. It's all good too, because like I love that these little bubbles exist that are pursuing that. It's an the indicator of their unpopularity. They're not put on a pedestal. Means that there is an authorization system, and that's like not good news, but it's good to know that it exists, so that like people like Jay and Owen and you, and to understand that the popularity of those things and the way how slow we grow to some extent. Not so much Owen; he's had a big base for a while, but the fact that that these arguments and these worldviews are never presented in the mainstream, it's important to know because there's barriers. It's not because people aren't looking for this content, looking for these discussions, because they are. So it's just important to. Sometimes it's I don't know. So I don't get bogged down with that, but I know sometimes it matters. I don't know who it matters to. But if listening and you want to build something, don't get discouraged because you didn't get the blue butthole star. That's what I call it. So a butthole with a scratch on it.
Oh, and before I let you go, I forgot about super chats because this is my first live stream I've ever done.
Can I do a shameless plug? I just
yeah, absolutely, dude,
my
absolutely.
Second book, Savage Memes Volume 2, and it's for pre-order, and it'll be like shipping May or late May, but it's a limited run, just like Savage Memes Volume 1, and I don't have any more Volume 1. So,
well, it's a collector's edition now.
It is. It's what I wanted to do. I wanted to just make one thing and not do it again, and that's it. And then I could potentially make like up to 5 volumes or whatever.
Right.
But I didn't want it to be just like sitting somewhere where, I want them to run out and want people to feel like, wow, they got one of those. That's really cool. So
you do
made by Jimbob.com.
Yeah. Sorry, you do 5 volumes, and that 6th year, when you have the Christmas special and you can get a volume of all 5 volumes.
Right. And I'll do one of those really bad commercials.
No, it's a great model, dude. I seriously, I love your comics. I think they're hilarious, and it's one of the few comics that actually make me laugh out loud, like literally.
Oh, good. That's good. That's the best compliment I can get, because a lot of them get heady, and it's just like, am I being too heady? Like, I want people to laugh too.
Oh, dude, I think they're hilarious, and it's so appropriate for our time and place that I don't know. I just love it. But anyways, for the super chats, our first one ever on this channel was by Jay Dyer, $9.99, and he said, "Persevere, bigot."
Yeah, that's right.
And another super chat by Nathaniel Hill. Thank you very much, brother. $13. He said, "This stream is OBS, Ortho Boomer Stream."
You're getting all of them from our first half hour.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
And then we had another super chat from Anti-Zeitgeist, $10. Thank you very much. And it says, "Don't worry, David. Your invoice from Jay will be in the mail soon. His Boomer Tech support services are top-notch."
Nice.
So thank you, Anti-Zeitgeist. Appreciate that. And we have another one from Irish Sailor, 91, $5, said, "Just got home. We'll have to watch on replay. Found you last week through Jay mentioning you. Really appreciate what you do. Do you upload any audio for download?" Currently, I do not upload any audio. It's the thing that's been nagging me on the back of my mind is I need to start making audio files of my videos and then uploading that on like SoundCloud and iTunes and all that stuff. It's just, you spend a whole day putting content on the internet, and it's just so time consuming to do all this stuff. I totally respect people that, commit themselves, and I'm trying to do the same, but I need to do that. I will do that. Eventually my videos, you can catch all the audios, so if you work and you can listen to podcasts, that will eventually be available. It's just doing that in between research for new videos, research for school, and just living life. It's difficult, but I will do that. So thank you, Irish Sailor. And then Steadfast Reactionary gave us, I think that's €2. I'm not positive what that currency is. He says, "Start a channel on Telegram, King." And I will do that. I know a lot of people are on Telegram, and it's made by Russians. It's one of the few places where you won't get deplatformed. So I plan on doing that. And then thank you very much, Chappie, for another, I believe it's €1. Apologize if that's not it. For $5. So thank you very much, Chappie. No question at all or comment, but thank you very much. This concludes the very first live stream on Church of the Eternal Logos YouTube channel, and it wasn't exactly the smoothest, so I thank you guys for bearing. We've got 44 people watching, which is more than I was expecting. I didn't know what to expect. So, and then thank you to our great guests made by Jimbob. Just wonderful content. And if you want to just plug all your links and social media real quick before we hop off here.
Sure. Made by Jimbob is where you can get my book and other crazy, funny objects and things, and then that's made by Jimbob.com. And then I just have an Instagram account. I haven't gone on. I have a D Live account, but I haven't really done much over there. But yeah, just Instagram at Made by Jimbob and madebyjimbob.com. And also, if you do want to get the book, there's a code Liberty that is still in effect for free shipping, and I do ship worldwide.
Oh, and we got another super chat. And sorry, I actually did not. I did not see the question to the super chat by Chappie. It actually said, what the YouTube super chat said, there's many ortho bros flocking to Telegram, and we need you there. Start a channel. And then another gentleman, ortho bro, sent me $2, I believe it's euros, and it says Telegram channel tonight, ! I will. I promise I will get on Telegram and start a channel tonight due to your guys' recommendation. So thank you very much. Thanks, Jimbob. Really, really appreciate it, and hopefully we can do it again in the future.
Awesome, dude, and keep going. Keep getting people on your stream, too. It's really important. Like, your videos are so good and well-structured and easy to access. They're really accessible, and they're trimmed nicely. But also, you interacting with these ideas with other people, especially people who oppose it, is going to give you a lot of traction, too.
Right.
So try to get people to fight you on things.
Yeah. In terms of the debate stuff, I almost feel a little hesitant because Jay is so good at it, and he has so much experience debating people, that it's something that I've thought about is, do I want to kind of go into the debating sphere and hosting debates and stuff like he does? Because, he knows he can do it better than I think I could.
I think more of like conversation. Like,
oh, okay. You mean just
style.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your stuff is Jay is so sharp. Like he's just done it for so long, where it's almost like he's bored by it because he can see the arguments coming before they happen. But whereas conversation, I think a lot of people, especially like from my following and stuff, they're more inclined. They debate, in the comments, but in an open format where it's more of a conversation, at least to begin with, I think people can easily, it's more accessible to people because they don't feel like it's like one or the other. Even though debates, I love debates, but I've seen like other formats where it's like, as long as the opposite views are challenged or whatever, it can almost translate a debate in certain segments, but the whole thing isn't a debate. You know what I mean?
Right. I see what you're saying.
It's like the thing that Joe Rogan really just gave up on. Yeah, it's amazing.
I know. It's
amazing.
It's hard to watch Rogan anymore.
I can't. I think he just got tired. He looks tired. He looks like he's not going to fight people on ideas right now. He's just like, I did it.
Right. He agrees with anybody who goes on his podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why if I ever go on, it's not going to be about theology. I'm just going to make him defend himself. Then it'll force a debate.
That's why he doesn't live stream anymore, so he doesn't have to post that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, my God. All right, brother. Well, thank you very much. I'll let you get on with your day and what you got to do. And God bless you and your work, and God bless your family.
Thank you. You too. And let me know. I think you'll just post this. Whatever. I don't know.
I don't know, dude. I'm still figuring out. I don't even know how to turn this thing off. I'm looking at it right now. All I see is a pause button. I have no idea.
Well, good luck with that. Hopefully, you're able to post it, and then maybe save the next 10 minutes of you, the recorded video of you trying to figure out what to do. Just save that as a separate video.
I know. I was so frustrated today before even doing this because I was watching all these YouTube videos on like how to do it, and I got through one. I was like, oh, well, you just use Google Hangout Air. Well, YouTube doesn't do that. So there was like a whole hour right there that I invested pointless. And then it's like, oh, shoot, now I have an hour until the conversation and trying to figure out what OBS is and then download it. And then first time it didn't work, so I had to uninstall it and then re-download it, and then it worked. And then trying to figure out, okay, well, how does Zoom work? Because originally it said, well, you can use Skype with what's called some NDI plug-in attachment.
Oh, yeah,
and then, so I was like trying to do that, but the NDI plugin wouldn't download on my computer. So then I was like, oh shoot, well, how do I do this with Zoom? And then I figured out how to do it with Zoom, and then it's just been a continual learning process to the point where I send you the email, the link, and then yeah. So hopefully, though, I appreciate you bearing with me, knowing that it was the first one. It wasn't going to be entirely smooth.
Well, I'll just keep an eye out for it. If anything, also send me. If I'm like out doing stuff, send me the link directly if you know what's up.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, will do, brother. Yeah, it should be up here fairly soon after we get done here. But all right, thank you, man. Again, I really appreciate it, and God bless you and your family, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.